I'm Dan Smoller with the Henry S. Olcott Memorial Library, and we're doing this program to create community among Theosophists. And my guest today is Carolyn Dorrance, who gave a tremendous presentation. Was it yesterday morning?
Yes.
And
Karma and social responsibility.
which I loved. And let's, before we talk about your speech and your message, which really struck me. Let's talk about you just for a bit, and how did you start with Theosophy?
Well, I came west. I'm a native of Massachusetts and went to college there. And after a few other events and activities, I came west to Santa Barbara, California to go to graduate school. And one of my chief professors was Raghavan Iyer, who was a native of India, and studied at Oxford and was an Oxford Don, as did his wife, Nandini Iyer, who was at the conference. And she, both of them, started the Santa Barbara branch of a United Lodge of Theosophists. And a colleague of mine just gave me a program card and told me where it was. And I walked in, and the very first lecture, Nandini was speaking, and she was making a distinction that I had thought about when I was 16 years old and never mentioned and never heard anybody else make that distinction. And so I was hooked from the beginning.
And were there any special book also within Theosophy? Were there any books that were special to you when you began, or that have been special?
Well, I think the writings of Mr. Judge and Mr. Crosby are very accessible, and they help you give a sense of a theosophical life. I was fascinated by Isis Unveiled by H.B. Blavatsky, and I did insist on sitting down. I had a little break, and I spent 3 months reading The Secret Doctrine before I signed the associate card. So it all made sense to me.
So Theosophy has such a rich offering in subtlety, in complexity of science and spirituality, and but you know what? You don't hear a lot of people coupling, at least I don't, Theosophy with social engagement, and which of course was what you were talking about yesterday. And well, first of all, and tell me if I'm wrong, but why are they so rarely paired together? I mean, that's been my brief experience, that you sometimes sense that Theosophists want to be disengaged from.
Well, that was one of the points I made in the talk yesterday, that people are attracted to the spiritual or something mysterious and seem to think, well, I'm going to become a yogi, I'm going to withdraw, I'm going to go sit quietly in meditation, I'm going to have some fantastic experience, I'm going to see the light, I'm going to be whatever it is. And that's a very natural attraction for human beings to have, because that is part of the promise of Theosophy, that with a great deal of effort and discipline and development, one can experience spiritual light, spiritual conscious, spiritual experience of the real that is the source of all that exists. So that's natural, and of course there's also a certain excitement. This was I contacted Theosophy in 1968, so there was a lot of excitement. Those are the days when the Hare Krishnas were walking down the street and chanting and ringing bells and things like that. So I think that's what attracted a number of people. In my case, I had grown up in a family that had some sense of concern for the social and political realities of the age. I'd gone to Girl State and had something of a peak experience of wanting to serve, and I majored in political science and international relations, discovered philosophy, so I was always oriented in that direction. And that's part of the attraction of Theosophy for me. And I think the teachers certainly emphasize that it's brotherhood and figuring out to help each other that is required if there's going to be true unity of life, and particularly unity among human beings, which of course is very hard to achieve because everybody's got their own opinion and all of that. So
I just to play devil's advocate for a second, I sort of heard the argument, or it's hinted at, that, you know, because this physical world is not the ultimate truth, and it's ephemeral, then we shouldn't really be worried too much about a person's physical or mental emotional suffering, because that's their karma, and let them have it, and don't get in the way of their karma. Let them suffer and find a spiritual path. You hear that.
well, that's a very dangerous doctrine, because people are, yes, they may be experiencing a karma of suffering, but nothing stays the same. And if nothing happens to improve their understanding of the situation, to make a little progress on countering the problems they have, and if you do nothing, well, that's going to make the situation worse, which means that in future lives, it's just going to get worse. And you could be involved with the very problem that somebody else had because you had an opportunity to do something you didn't. So if you really think through the karma and the doctrine of reincarnation, there's no escaping the consequences of passivity, because everything will get just worse. And we know that in our own just personal relationships.
Yeah, really. Yep.
If somebody's got a problem and you don't do something, and sometimes it's much easier to do something, at least to reach out, and calmness will come when a person who's suffering thinks that somebody cares, and that's just a first step. But it doesn't do any good to walk away.
In your talk yesterday, and I was just so struck by the way you seem to couple this love for the complexity and richness of Theosophy with the simplicity and absolute necessity of compassion. And you said yesterday, maybe, if you can't figure out what to do, maybe you go into an area that's kind of torn up, maybe a quote-unquote ghetto or something, and you bring some flowers. You start there. And who knows what good might come of that?
Yeah.
And I just found myself thinking, wow, it's just so refreshing to hear that.
Well, it's brightening up someone's day. It's everybody loves flowers.
Yeah.
So to have that effort, and to have something unexpected and something that's beautiful, something that's natural, it can have a definite consequence, and the person, the recipient, isn't going to forget that somebody reached out and did something that was both spontaneous and generous, and that memory is going to stay. And maybe someday they'll do it to somebody. Maybe they'll do even, bring flowers to many people, because and just be motivated, because what we have to do is awaken and bring out the best in other human beings.
Yeah. And what about people who say, the world is such a mess, we can't even begin to fix it?
Well, I think that's H.P. Blavatsky and all the teachers of Theosophy and the teachers of the world, the Dalai Lama. How could he really hope that the Chinese will change their viewpoint?
Yeah.
But he can't act upon that basis. He has to have hope, and he has to do what he can. And of course, he's done a great deal, and he's in a position to do much more than any of us might be able to do. Well, it's not even a conditional, but that you do what you can so that it creates momentum in a better direction, because that's what karma is, action, and it's all the time working, and we can use it to reinforce what we choose to do. Or if we think we're going to ignore it, then we're going to find ourselves reaping consequences we didn't expect, and they may be quite negative.
Is meditation part of your practice?
Yes, I call it quiet time,
okay,
because I don't want to claim that I'm a great meditator or something, but I definitely, morning and evening, I find even when I'm very tired after a long day, it changes the field of your consciousness very quickly. So everybody should have some text, some way of both centering and thinking of the highest and more sacred realities in the morning and to try to bring yourself back to that point late at night.
And how would you define the magic word Theosophy?
Theosophia.
Yeah.
I would define it as sacred wisdom.
Sacred wisdom.
Yes.
And do you feel like you receive sacred wisdom as you engage also socially with a spiritual intention?
Well, I think one of the teachings that I certainly heard from, I remember Mrs. Iyer, she's always emphasized as a student of Plotinus, the three ways of knowing. There's the knowing by just ordinary sensory perception. There's the knowing by reason. And there's the knowing by intuition. And I think theosophical wisdom comes to us most importantly through intuition. So I'm not really a person that a rationalist. I have a neighbor who I definitely think is a rationalist. I'm kind of in motion, but I do have these intuitions, and I think following those, that's when Theosophy gets through and gives an indication. And of course, what's really happening is within your higher self, within your mind and ethical discernment at best, which is you're not necessarily aware of when you're running around doing what you do during the day.
Yeah.
But it's always churning away. So it has the capacity to be bearing witness to what you're doing at a lower level, but it is suffused with theosophy, with theosophical wisdom. And so it knows the principles, it understands harmony and disharmony. It's all programmed. I mean, that's what Theosophy offers. It's an intelligent universe, and intelligence is at work everywhere. We just get so involved and so reactive that we don't spend any time, we don't give an opportunity for that wisdom to come through. But that wisdom is there, and it's doing its bit, and then fortunately it can send you might say, its message to our lesser mind. And if we stop and actually say, wait a minute now, and trust in it, and then that's Theosophy in action.
What would you recommend to a person new to Theosophy who wants to get started, but let's say they walk in our library, and that's a whole third of our library? Where should they start? How would they know? Because maybe it's different for each person, or you think there's a couple? It
is different. Some people come by book. Some people come by listening. Some people come out of their own suffering or just some kind of experience. I found that to read the most elementary survey of theosophical teachings. The book I have found very helpful in that way is by Robert Crosby, Universal Theosophy, because he speaks in an ordinary language, but he is speaking tremendous truths, both about our inner self and karma and reincarnation and a league of humanity, as he calls it. So I would find a theosophical book that is oriented towards where we're at. And as a teacher, I know you have to start where we're at, and you have to. And some people, it's with wondering who they are. Others, it's why is there so much violence in the world or something, and go for that. I would not go for the most abstract occult kind of, and I wouldn't go for, that's something that you have to prepare for and have the right kind of time to study.
And I'm sorry, but and what subject is it that you teach?
Well, now I'm actually teaching under the framework of history. I'm teaching world civilizations, which gives me a great opportunity to bring together the many different fields. I actually ended up credentialed in philosophy, history, and political science with a great deal of emphasis on international relations. So I've always been interested since a small child in the world and learning about the world. So my main courses now are world civilizations, both ancient and modern. And those are survey courses.
Ancient? Like how about Atlantis and that too?
Well, it doesn't get that ancient.
You're talking about more, right? Okay.
But though you can call attention to Plato's vision.
Okay. Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah. I think the main aim in the first half of the course is to call students' attentions to the philosophers and religious teachers of what's called the axial age, because that's what they're looking for, something to orient their sense of identity and to learn some messages, so to speak. So when I teach, whether it's Confucius or Plato or the rise of Buddhism, that seems to have a big impact because it seems relevant to their lives. It doesn't 2,500 years ago, but it's still relevant because it gives it wakes up the mind. It gives them something to think about.
Yeah, maybe very different than what they just had in high school.
Yeah, exactly. And I do things like Middle East history and world history and international relations and sometimes comparative religions in the philosophy department. Depends where I'm needed.
So with all this work on history and then also your theosophical studies, do you feel like you spot patterns and like there's an undercurrent, a big collective undercurrent and kind of guiding?
Yes, and actually I bring this into American history. I think the most fundamental trend that's very accessible, of course, is the opportunity for what I call individuation, for becoming an individual, which means being able to think and ask questions and to make choices, not just so much about in practical ways, but choices about, well, what do I think are good ideas to live by?
Yeah.
That's what I think students are searching for,
and
what is important. So whether the source is they read a Platonic dialogue or they read the verses from a Buddhist sutra, or they are very struck in Christianity and Islam are part of the survey, that they realize that, well, first that there is a heritage for human beings. There's a huge heritage, none of which they've heard about in high school, none of which. And that heritage includes not just the arts and politics, but it includes ideas. And that these ideas are something that they have available to choose from and build their own sense of identity. So they're not caught in very narrow sociological identities that they're of this group or this religion. And that's the path to freedom. So I want them to be free in the sense that they can think and know where to get more information, and that's the way to really being capable and also being able to weather the storms of life, so to speak.
Yeah, so it sounds like you don't see any separation between your quote-unquote theosophical learning and teaching and your everyday, more mundane, quote-unquote, teaching.
Well, and in your everyday, you're going into a classroom and they've gotten quite large. You're being part of a group of strangers. You don't ever really get to know who the students are. And yes, you have responsibilities, but we come together, we're exploring something. We do this for 4 months and then they move on to something else. So it certainly is a source of engagement and challenge to get to know, who they are a bit, and it's a challenge to keep them interested, and of course it's a challenge to get them to read the textbook.
Do you think there's something inherently spiritual about being deeply curious and engaged with any subject, or not necessarily?
I think I would think they can do this in science classes or mathematics or literature. One of my old-fashioned goals is that they have the experience of kind of separating themselves for 2 hours from all their friends and all of that, and to go quietly sit and study, and out of that begin to think and to experience some deeper engagement with the subject matter. And anything that gives a certain strength for that. I don't know if you're reading a manual on how to be a better archer.
Yeah, right.
It would do it,
but
maybe. I rule out nothing.
And having surveyed all these different cultures and times, civilizations, how would you diagnose the one we're in right now? I don't mean diagnose in a negative sense. How would you assess, how are we doing? What do you think we have to be careful about? What do you think are our opportunities?
Well, in the second half of the survey course, the focus is on modern, the emergence of the modern era, 500 years ago, Renaissance on. And what is it to be modern? We have great discussions about that. And we certainly include the greater social freedom, the liberty that has become part of modern life. And so we kind of see that happening, and legal barriers dropping, and then political systems changing to allow something more democratic. But then we have to face the fact that the modern era has also had a great deal of violence, of prejudice and confrontation, and then the impact of technology. And I don't think we've really recognized the impact of technology on human society. Marshall McLuhan and others wrote some very insightful books. But we need a new set of concepts. That's what I didn't get to in my talk yesterday. We need more focus on something like the common good. We need something, we need some new ideas to strengthen our social understanding so that we can at least reduce, if not solve, some of the problems of the chaos in modern society. Because now we have the internet, which is fantastic, but we have the internet being used for very awful means, not just violence, but pornography or whatever it is. So I think we're at a critical point that we're either going to either come up with some new ideas that include karma and responsibility, but also joy and appreciation of the vast array of human beings doing things. I mean, 7.3 billion of us. I use these points a lot in class. Remember, you're just one of 7.3 billion to get their attention. That there's a big story out there.
Yeah.
And they need to kind of become more aware and informed and think about, well, how am I going to live in this world that's so complex and has so much diversity, and where's the common ground that people can share?
Here's the last question. Let's say Madame Blavatsky walks in right now to this convention, and she says, "I've got just a couple minutes, but I'm going to give you a couple goals that I want you all to work on for the next 20 years, or maybe one goal." What would it be for Theosophists?
Well, of course, she would always mention brotherhood. But I think the most important part of brotherhood is developing nonviolence in consciousness and values. And that's not just, we don't really have to have so many guns. I've given an opinion on that. But what are you watching on television? How are you using language? I mean, there's a room for a lot of improvement.
Yeah, I guess you're right. There's a lot that goes into our environment at a holistic level. Yeah.
So I think that she would probably, that's the message, and she might be a little bit irritated that more hasn't been done on just basics and how people raise children and all of that. So that would be maybe our goal. I mean, where is the message of nonviolence in American society? Everybody's too afraid.
It sells, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you very much for your time. It's been really wonderful listening to you here and your lecture, and I look forward to hearing more teaching from you in the future.
Well, I hope your series is successful. So.
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.